Travel back to 5000 BC. In Mesopotamia, the city of Eridu is barely a cluster of mud brick huts. Stonehenge will not exist for another 1500 years. Writing has not been invented anywhere on Earth. And yet on a long, narrow island in the middle of the largest freshwater lake on the planet, Isle Real, human beings are already swinging heavy stone hammers against veins of pure native copper, working a mining district that would eventually stretch nearly 150 miles along the Quinault Peninsula. This is the world of what archaeologists call the Old Copper Complex, or the Old Copper Culture. The earliest radiocarbon dates from sites like the Eagle River pits and the burial grounds at Oconto, Wisconsin, push human copper use in this region back to roughly 9,500 years ago. Read that again. 9,500. That is older than the wheel, older than the domesticated horse, older than the first agricultural villages in the Indus Valley. What made this region unique was the geology. Lake Superior copper deposits are something almost unheard of on Earth, native copper, meaning pure metallic copper sitting in the rock as nuggets, sheets, and massive boulders. No smelting required, no furnaces, no alloying, just chip it loose, heat it in a wood fire to soften it, hammer it cold, and you have a finished blade. The people who figured this out were doing metalwork roughly 2,000 years before the Bronze Age civilizations of the Near East had even imagined alloying tin with copper. And here is the part nobody tells you in school. Stick with me, because in a minute I am going to tell you about a single copper boulder these miners left half extracted in the rock, a piece so massive it took a modern crew with steel tools to move it, and what they did to it will completely change how you think about ancient North America. By around 3000 BC, the old copper miners had developed an industrial operation. The word industrial is not an exaggeration. When Charles Whittlesey, a Yale-trained geologist and former Army officer, mapped these workings in 1862 and again in 1872, he counted, by his own estimate, more than 5,000 ancient mining pits, and that number has since climbed past 10,000. Some pits descended 30 feet into solid trap rock. Some ran in long open trenches you can still walk today on Isle Real, in the Minong Mine District in Macargo Cove, and along the bluffs of the Ontonagon River. The technique was patient and brutal. Miners built bonfires directly on the copper-bearing rock, then doused the hot stone with cold lake water. The thermal shock cracked the bedrock. Then came the stone mauls, round, grooved hammers, sometimes weighing 30 pounds, hafted to wooden handles. Archaeologists at the Minong site have cataloged more than 10,000 of these mauls left behind, many of them broken in the act of striking. They look almost identical to mining hammers found in the prehistoric copper workings of the Seine and the Balkans, but they were swung in Michigan thousands of years earlier. And the boulder I promised you. In 1874, miners working for the Minong Mining Company on Isle Real uncovered a massive lump of pure copper estimated at nearly 6,000 pounds. The ancient miners had already found it. They had spent what archaeologists later calculated as generations of effort raising it onto a cribwork of oak logs. The wood was preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor mud, and they had hammered away every protrusion they could detach. The wood was carbon-dated. The cribbing was older than King Tut. Now multiply that effort. Across the Quinault and Isle Real, the total volume of rock displaced by these ancient pits has been estimated by geologist Roy Dreyer in the 1950s and refined by later researchers to represent the removal of somewhere between 500,000 and 1.5 billion pounds of copper. Even if we take the most conservative figure, this is a quantity of refined metal that would have dwarfed anything Bronze Age Europe produced in the same era, which raises the obvious problem. Where is it? This is where the story becomes a genuine archaeological mystery, and where the next part is where most people get this completely wrong. Inside the Great Lakes region itself, old copper culture artifacts are abundant, but only abundant relative to other prehistoric finds. We have spear points, awls, fish hooks, harpoon barbs, bracelets, beads, gorgets. The Oconto burial site in Wisconsin, excavated in 1952, yielded around 100 copper grave goods, alongside human remains, carbon-dated to roughly 7,500 years before present. The collections at the Milwaukee Public Museum, the Wisconsin Historical Society, and the University of Michigan together hold tens of thousands of pieces. But tens of thousands of pieces, even hundreds of thousands, do not account for hundreds of millions of pounds of mined metal. The math does not close, not even close. Some of it can be explained by what archaeologists call the Hopewell Trade Network, which flourished much later, between roughly 200 BC and 500 AD. Hopewell burial mounds from Ohio to Florida contain Lake Superior copper, chemically fingerprinted by trace element analysis to specific Michigan deposits. Copper traveled to the Gulf of Mexico. Copper traveled to the Atlantic coast. But again, the volume found in all Hopewell sites combined is a fraction of what was mined. Around 1200 BC, give or take, the old copper mining operation simply stops. The pits go silent. The fires go cold. The miners walk away. For nearly 3,000 years, until the French Jesuit Claude Allouez heard rumors of copper boulders from Ojibwe informants in 1666, the European world has no inkling that any of this ever happened. When American geologist Douglas Houghton confirmed the deposits in 1841 and triggered the first copper rush in United States history, the prospectors were astonished to find that someone had already been there. Pre-1841 mining maps from the Cliff Mine, the Central Mine, and the Quincy Mine all show modern shafts following the exact path of ancient trenches. So who were they? The honest answer, the one the evidence supports, is that they were the direct ancestors of the indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes, Algonquian-speaking communities whose descendants include the Ojibwe, Menominee, and Ho-Chunk nations. Ojibwe oral tradition, recorded by ethnographer William Warren in 1852, explicitly describes ancestors mining copper on Minang, the Ojibwe name for Isle Real. But that still does not solve the disappearance. And it is here that fringe theories rush in, claims of Phoenician traders, Minoan expeditions, even Bronze Age European voyagers carrying Michigan copper across the Atlantic to fuel the foundries of the Mediterranean. Mainstream archaeology rejects these claims because there is no Old World artifact found in the mines and no Michigan copper definitively identified in Old World bronzes. But the mystery the fringe is reacting to is real. The metal is genuinely missing. Drop a comment below. What do you think happened to the missing copper? Trade, ritual deposition, lost to corrosion over millennia, or something we have not considered yet? I read every reply. Here is why this matters now, and why it has stayed buried in the footnotes of textbooks for so long. For more than a century, the prevailing narrative of human technological development placed the cradle of metallurgy firmly in the Old World. Anatolia, the Levant, the Balkans, the Indus. North America was treated as a continent of Stone Age hunter-gatherers waiting for European contact in 1492 to be introduced to metalwork. The old copper complex shatters that framing. The earliest secure radiocarbon dates for shaped copper artifacts in the Great Lakes, published by archaeologist David Pompini of Kent State and his colleagues in 2021, place complex copperworking in North America at roughly 9,500 years before present. That is older than copper artifacts from the famous Vinca culture of the Balkans. That is older than copper from Saddleheruyuk. That is older than anything you have ever been told. The reason this story was forgotten is partly geological. Copper corrodes. In the acidic forest soils of the upper Midwest, an iron blade rusts to nothing in a century. A copper blade survives, but it greens and pits, and to a 19th century farmer plowing his field, it looks like a curiosity, not a relic. Tens of thousands of these objects were melted down by settlers for scrap before any systematic survey was done. The historical record was literally resmelted. And it is partly political. Acknowledging the scale of old copper mining means acknowledging that the indigenous peoples of North America operated one of the largest pre-industrial metal extraction enterprises in the ancient world, long before the first Europeans set foot on the continent. That fact does not fit neatly into the colonial story that justified 5 centuries of displacement. The copper itself never went away. Every time you charge your phone, every time a current flows through the building you are sitting in, there is a reasonable chance that some fraction of that metal came out of the Keweenaw Peninsula, because the modern mines, which operated from 1845 to 1968, pulled almost 11 billion pounds out of the same deposits the ancients worked. The infrastructure of the 20th century was built on top of an archaeological site we still do not fully understand. CTA 1213 Min. If forgotten history like this is the reason you are still watching, subscribe. This channel exists to drag stories like the old copper culture out of the footnotes and into the light, one video at a time. We are a small channel and every subscriber is the difference between this story reaching 10 people or 10,000. Hit the bell so the next one finds you. Outro 1315 Min. The lesson the old copper miners left us is uncomfortable. Civilizations do not have to fall in a fire to be forgotten. They can simply be ignored. A culture can mine a continent for 4,000 years, lay down hundreds of millions of pounds of metal across a trade network spanning half a hemisphere, and still be edited out of the textbooks if it does not match the story the next civilization wants to tell about itself. What survived was not the empire. It was the holes in the rock, the hammers in the dirt. The stories the Ojibwe kept telling, even when nobody outside their fires was listening. The miners of Lake Superior remind us that the past is not a closed book. It is a half-extracted boulder, propped on oak cribbing, waiting for the next generation patient enough to lift it. If this hit, my video on the sunken Bronze Age cities of the Black Sea coastline will make even more sense now, because the same pattern, mined wealth disappearing into thin air, plays out there too, with one detail that points directly back to North America. 5,000 years before Columbus, somebody pulled an estimated 1.5 billion pounds of pure copper out of the bedrock around Lake Superior, and then vanished from the historical record. In this documentary, we trace the rise, the operation, and the strange disappearance of the old copper culture of North America, the oldest large-scale metal mining civilization on Earth, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, older than the Bronze Age itself. Who were the miners? How did they work the deposits of Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula with nothing but stone hammers and fire? And the question mainstream archaeology still cannot answer: where did all the copper actually go? Real dates, real sites, real artifacts, and the political reasons this story is missing from your textbook. 00. 00. The metal in your phone has a secret 00. 45. The world in 5000 BC. 03. 00. 10,000 ancient pits. 06. 00. The missing billion pounds. 09. 00. Why this story was erased. 12. 00. Subscribe for Forgotten History. 13. 00. What the miners left us. Ancient history, lost civilization, archaeology, old copper culture, Lake Superior.